Blender to create isometric tokens for our Foundry VTT game, or really any role-playing game you want to play in isometric mode. So this is Blender. It's a 3D tool. It is well, it's a big learning curve, right? If you've never used a 3D animation or modeling tool, we're not going to be doing any animation or modeling today. We're just going to take some sort of pre-made free assets to take into this free 3D modeling and rendering program to do some really basic stuff. But this could take a little while to get used to. I recommend taking like a full tutorial. I'll link to a good one where you kind of just learn the interface and make a donut and do some really simple stuff. It's a really good learning. It can be actually kind of fun. I'll link to another video on YouTube that I used to learn the interface. But since version of 2.8 of Blender, it's gotten a lot easier to use. It's getting a lot more attention as a result of sort of working a lot more like people expect a 3D tool to use if you've used any other tool before. So when you start out, you can see that it's got three objects that are created in the most basic of scenes. There's a cube, there's a camera, and there's a light. And I can kind of go through the scene collection and have them highlighted here. And when if I click on the cube and I hit the G key on my keyboard, that translates it, so that moves. And this is moving sort of like relative to the pane of the screen. I hit escape to cancel that out. But instead I can hit G and then hit X, and it'll lock the movement to the X-axis, or Y, and it'll lock the movement to the Y-axis, or Z, which in this modeling program is an up and down, locking it to the Z-axis here. Hit escape. If I hit the tilde key, it brings up this radial menu, and I can go and switch my view to what the camera is seeing. So here you'll see the camera is actually a perspective camera. There is foreshortening, right? These lines converge at a vanishing point. So if I wanted to change that, I could go to the camera object, and over here on the right-hand side, I can go into the camera settings, and I could change it from a perspective camera to an orthographic camera. That is the type of camera you need for isometric. Now, the angles here aren't necessarily going to be perfect 30 degree angles that we want for matching our isometric grid in our role-playing game. So to change that, and just make sure the camera is selected, and I go into this object properties here where I can change the rotation and the position of the camera. And I can do it using sliders and things, but the most important one here is the rotation. So the magic number here to hit is 54.736 degrees. When I do that, and now I can actually have my mouse over here, have the camera selected, hit the G key, and I can kind of translate the camera relative to the pane of the camera, which is a good way to kind of center in on something. So now I have this image here of this cube, and if I hit the F12 key, up comes, should come the rendering panel. Now you notice that this rendered instantly, because it's basically just rendering it the same way it would a video game. Really basic. It's just kind of rendering the triangles, and this is the most simple scene you could possibly imagine. So it rendered almost instantaneously. But if you wanted to get a higher quality render, what you could do is you could go into the output settings and switch the render engine to Cycles, which is the ray tracing engine that's in here, and 128 rays for kind of sampling of pixels. And if I hit the render again, you'll notice this goes slower, and in such a simple scene it doesn't look any different, because of course in a simple polygons it would be just as perfect. But ray tracing is going to make this look a lot better once it comes to using interesting lighting or doing anything more complicated. So I'm going to close that out, and the last thing I need to learn how to do in order to render a token is I need to learn how to get the background not to be gray but to be transparent. So to do that, I go to the film settings and I hit the transparent checkbox. I also need to remember to, I think, go to the camera settings. Let me see if I can find it. I often forget where this setting is. I got to make sure that the RGBA is turned on in the output. So I go to this output properties RGBA, and in the camera I have to go to, or pardon me, in the render properties, I got to go to the film and transparent. And once I do that and hit F12 again to do the render, it no longer puts the gray background in. So this object should be usable as a this should be usable as a token. And to prove that, and to prove that this angle is perfect at 30 degrees, what I'm now going to do is I'm going to go and save this image, and let me just put it in this folder that I'm working in right now. So I'm going to save that image, and now let's jump over to Photoshop. Yeah, I'll just drag this image over. So yeah, here we go, and you can see it's transparent, right? And if I go to this edge here, then I take out the measurement tool, and I kind of drag from corner to corner. You see this angle up here is 28 degrees. Yeah, pretty close to perfect. That's going to be, just be a little bit different based upon which pixel I pick. I might want to mess with that angle a little bit more, but 28 is close enough to perfect. The target is 30, so that might actually be a little too steep. So I might go and mess with that setting more and recommend something else in the comments or as an overlay on this video. So now we don't want to render cubes, right? We want to render a model. So the question is, just to test this technique, where can I get 3D models? Well, you can definitely go to HeroForge, and HeroForge has the ability for you to customize a 3D model. I've done this with some of the characters from my last game, where I actually got a 3D printer a service to print out some of my players' characters, and I bought for about $8 the STL files, the 3D model files of these characters, and I went and bought them, but I downloaded them as STL files. I didn't have HeroForge print them out for me, and that was cool. But in this new Pro version, just so you know, there's also an ability to have like a photo booth, and if you have the Pro version, it'll do the transparency, and you can pose it and say, yeah, I want it in more of an isometric view. Let me get rid of that border, take it back to an isometric view. You can render an isometric token this way. We'll get into that a little bit more, but this costs money, right? To get this 3D model or the Pro version of this costs money. So let me start with something else, which is if you go to Patreon and you check out MZ4250, I think this guy is very prolific, and he's 3D modeled pretty much the entire Monsters Manual for D&D and even some stuff from some other games. But if you scroll down, there's rewards, which you should definitely check out and support your Patreon creators. There's rewards, but if we check out, this is an interesting model, the Vecna, so it's a lich. So I can go into this Shapeways product, and if you make a free Shapeways account, then you'll be able to download the product, and it downloads a zip file, and you gotta extract it. But inside that zip file is an STL. So I go back to Blender, and what I should be able to do, and if you just translate out of here, get the scene here. If I file, import STL, and I jump to this folder I'm in, I got the Vecna STL ready to go, and I import that, it's going to import that free 3D model that I just downloaded off the internet for this thing right in here. Now you notice he is way too big. You can either, back the camera up, or you can scale down this guy. I'm going to choose to scale down this guy. So I'm going to select Vecna by clicking on him, or I could click on him over here. I can go to this properties, and I'm going to scale this guy down. So I'm going to go to 0.05 in each dimension. If I knew Blender better, I'd know how to do this just all in one click. And now, moving to my camera perspective, that's a little bit closer. I don't need this anymore. And I can probably click on the camera and center him. I might even want to zoom the camera in. Now, orthographic cameras, moving them closer and farther away from the image doesn't really change how much of the scene, because it's orthographic, right? It's not, there's no foreshortening. So instead I have to go to the camera and go to this orthographic scale, and to zoom it out and zoom it in. And now I can center him here, right? And now I can hit F12 to render, and you'll see this very pretty model rendering. Now, there's a couple things you'll notice by default. One, we're pretty close to perfect isometric. We're only a couple minutes in, so that's really cool. I could just, get this out and use it directly, and this is pretty much good enough to use, except it's black and white. Or I might think, I want the surface not to look so white plasticky, or I want to color in the surface. There's ways to do that, though there's lots of complex ways to do that. Or I might want to change the lighting, right? So the lighting right now is kind of coming from the top right, and I might want to light this guy more consistently based on what I want for my scene. So I'm going to go to the top view here. I'm going to pick out this light, and well, actually, let's move to the kind of this camera view, right? And I'm going to kind of zoom out a bit, and if I pick this light and move it, you'll see the current way that this is rendering, nothing changes. But up in the top right, there's how this viewport is being rendered. And I can render it as wireframe, kind of simple stuff, or a basic preview of the lighting, or even using the rendering engine itself. So I can actually click on the light and move it, and you'll get a preview at lower resolution, obviously, of what the lighting is going to be like. Blender is pretty cool, right? When I learned how to use 3D programs 20 years ago, they had nowhere near this power because, of course, they didn't have this level of 3D acceleration. I don't actually think this is using my graphics card on my laptop. My laptop doesn't really have a fancy graphics card, so this is pretty much just rendering straight out of the CPU, and that's pretty incredible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the top view, and I'm going to move this light to the kind of top left of the model, which is where I normally kind of shade things when I'm doing other artwork. And I'm going to copy and paste that light and have a second copy of the light that's sort of behind him and edge lighting him. And I'm going to move to the front view, and I'm going to move this one down so it's kind of coming from a lower angle. And another thing you can do is you can change the colors on the light. So if I click on the light and go to its light settings, which should look like a light bulb, I can make the one that's coming from the top left maybe like a little cyan. And then I can have this one down here, and I can change it and have it be something a little bit opposite of cyan. Right? And so now I go back to my camera view, and now this is looking a little bit more interesting. I can get some more edge definition because, you know, I got some shadows on him, some backlighting, some front lighting. You know, that first light that was blue, I kind of want it to be more powerful than the backlight. So let's just up it by a factor of 10 on watts. Okay, maybe that's too much. Maybe 5,000 watts. All right, and for this one back here, maybe I can go on this red light, take it to 500 watts. It's a little bit softer there, and yeah, that should work. So now if I do this and I do the render, you're going to see with two lights in the scene and a more complex model, this should take longer. Right? This render is now going to start crunching. I don't know if you can hear the processor fan in the background, but you can see this render is going to start to take longer. And because it's a more complex scene, this basic level, it's going to look really grainy. So in Blender, what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the number of samples, and that's going to make this take longer. It's still a plasticky kind of look, and that's okay. But I'll show you something to make it look like a different material later. So what do we want to do? We want to increase the number of samples. So I got to go to the render settings. It's on 128. Take it to 1024. And then I'll hit the F12 button again to render it. So now it's going to spend more time in each area of the screen here. All right, this render could actually take a couple of minutes. And you'll probably have seen from like behind the scenes in your favorite 3D animated movies, right? They have all, you know, server farms worth of machines rendering your movies because they're doing this type of work, but they're doing way more samples and way more complex rendering algorithms to be able to make them look really, really clean, make the light look really natural and soft. So here, you know, the light is actually bouncing around a little bit in between these objects, which is why you can get light bouncing off the base here and bouncing up into the Lich's underskirts. Never thought I'd say that, Lich's underskirts. You know, under his robe here, you can kind of see the light kind of bouncing around this very plasticky object. But just to show how cool Blender is, this is a plasticky look. What if we wanted him to look more like marble? There's a really quick setting, and this is a, you can learn a lot, right? There's a lot of stuff to learn here. I'm going to move this into a simpler lighting mechanism, otherwise we're going to kind of overload things. But if I go into Vecna here and I go to his materials, I can create a new material for him and I can start changing things. So one, and I can change the base color of the material that he is, right? And the surface color maybe, right? And that'll change some stuff. And, you know, change the way he looks. Let me go to the render and take this back to 128. So well, let's take it to 64. Let's do a real rough screen render here. So, you know, if I want the token to be a color of plastic, I can do that, right? But then the other thing I can do with Vecna here is I can give him a subsurface scatter rating. And this is going to make his material kind of somewhat light permissible, right? So the light's going to come in and then it's going to bounce around inside the model a little bit, like it's made out of quartz or pearl, or, you know, this is a good approach for skin as well. So there's this whole world. I'm just going to drag this to the right, maybe go at 0.25, right? And then when I run this render, and I'll do a low resolution version of it first, right? Now the light is doing some interesting stuff. Now it's like actual, you know, this looks like a mini they got printed out on a table, you know, by like I bought in a board game or something, right? Because the light is a little, he's a little opalescent, right? The light is kind of bouncing around inside the plastic. So just messing around with that, there's this whole world of lighting this guy. So you know what, I'm going to take him back to just pure white. RGB for the base color, and for the surface color I'm going to take them back to pure white, RGB, and then I'm going to go to the output. I'm going to render this at 1024, and I'm going to hit the render button. I might fast forward this video so you don't have to watch the whole render, but we're going to have different lights scattered around inside a white plasticky model that's somewhat see-through, and you're going to get a pretty fancy look here. All right, so I'll be back when this renders. All right, we are back. Let's see, that took 4 minutes to render. So, you know, if I was serious about this, I might need to not do this on my Macintosh and go buy a PC with a real graphics card. But, you know, whatever, good enough for D&D work. And I'm going to save this image. I'm going to save it as like Vecna render or something. Here's my Vecna render. So I opened up Vecna here and go to this layer and let's just mess with his drop shadow for a little bit. So just want to have a little bit of that, and that should work for me. Alternatively, I could use an outer glow, have the outer glow be like dark, and have the opacity on it be really thick, and the size of it be a little bit bigger, just to give him an outline here. Let's do that. Let's try that. So he'll look fine in a black scene, but if he's on a white scene, I kind of need this for him to stand out. And I can go to my isometric sizing area, right? And I can, I'm just going to do a drag and drop to create a token. Bring him in as an NPC. Just kind of center him here. He already looks about the right size. So there's Vecna, but he needs some stats. And I've got VTTA running, so I can sort of update it and import it into Foundry. So now if I go into here, my actors, I should be able to find Lich. All right, so there's a Lich right there. I'm going to duplicate it, drag it out. I'm going to go Vecna, prototype token, click him, assign the token, close. So now I can go to the isometric NPCs, right? And I can go to some other scene. Now I should be able to go and take my generic Vecna token, drop him in, and have him go cast some crazy spell like Cloud Kill. boom, right? And it should all be set up. So pretty cool stuff. So does he look, you know, good enough to use in a game? Maybe. It's the same as like just having a plastic unpainted token. Maybe in later games we can get into how to use him painted. All right, cool. What I want to do is see what would it take to get a mini in here that is from HeroForge, because that's the other easy source of 3D minis. So I'm going to jump over to HeroForge here for a second. And so I've got a whole bunch of heroes, but let's grab maybe somebody let's grab one like, yeah, this one's pretty cool. So I'm going to open up this flaming sword lady. So what I see a lot of people doing on the internet is just kind of rotating this to approximately isometric, right? Getting something like this, and then going into Photoshop and getting rid of the background. Now this background didn't used to be here, and there's pretty obvious reasons. It's because they wanted to monetize the clean cutout of the background, which is fine. Everybody, you know, companies should be able to monetize the stuff they make in whatever way they want to, and people then decide whether they want to pay the money. So here's, you know, this character in sort of an isometric mode, or at least a close enough representation of the angle. You don't really have to worry about foreshortening on something this small. But if you have the pro version, right, so if you paid the $60 a year, I don't even, you know, however many dollars it is a year to do that, you can go to the booth, you go to the token, get rid of the background, and then go to the camera and model in an isometric. And that's going to be pretty close to a 30-degree angle, but it's not going to be perfect. So the trick I want to tell people is you click on the canvas, and then you can use the left and right arrow keys to orient this person the way you want them for isometric in terms of which direction they're facing. And then after that, very carefully off of the isometric, you need to hit the up arrow 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And since I have the 3D model for this character, because I actually did 3D print it, I was able to compare this in Blender and kind of line them up. And between 4 and 5 clicks is about what it takes to get to a 30-degree angle for the base. I was able to compare it to the actual model positioned correctly in Blender. So that's the trick. You just do up click 5 times, and then from here you click on the canvas again so that the rest of the app kind of realizes that you've moved it using the arrows, which may not be a standard way to move it. And then you go to this capture. You can either get a low resolution one just by clicking 1 click. You hit the arrow, and I'm gonna go get something slightly higher resolution, download it, and jump over to Foundry. So where did this probably put in my downloads folder? So I can just grab it and drag it over here and bring it in as say as an NPC. All right, so here we go. Already this is looking pretty good. Right, I probably need to size it and position it a little bit better. So let's go to my token sizing. Zoom in here. Let's go to token sizing. Yeah, she's a little off center. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my hex size positioner and just use the arrow keys. That's closer the better, but how tall should she be? She should probably be taller than Vecna. Half orc. So let's go 1.3 maybe. Yeah, so she's a big lady here, big bruising barbarian. Save those changes, and that's an instance of a token. So I'm going to go back to this character, go to the prototype, and then assign that token. So now if I go to my loading screen and drag her over, this should be better, right? So now this is a kind of a full, and I had to pay money on HeroForge to be able to take that nice screenshot. But this in my mind is like really nice quality. And if I ever wanted to repose it or do something different or change the equipment, I'd be able to do that at no additional cost because the HeroForge is a subscription, which is what I really like. So for my character in my other game, you know, I'm able to repose them and change the camera angle and do all sorts of nice stuff there. So that's the way that you can get 3D models for not too much money into HeroForge pretty cheaply, into your isometric tool pretty quickly. Really excited about that. Thanks for watching the video, and yeah, have fun.